Welcome to B2B Bites, the BigCommerce B2B podcast, where we explore everything about manufacturing, distribution, and wholesale. On each of our episodes, we interview leaders in the B2B commerce space so they can share their experiences with you. Today, I am really excited to be joined by Devashish Saxena. He is a true leader in the B2B space, having had roles at Texas Instruments, Rexel, Farnell, PPG, and most recently as Chief Digital Officer at Imperial Dade. Devashish, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Lance. Thanks for having me.
Maybe to kind of kick us off, it'd be great if you could share a little bit about yourself, your experience, how you got into the world of B2B.
Sure. I grew up in Hong Kong and came to the US to study. So my background, I have a technology background. I have a couple of degrees in computer science and worked in telecom. I call them my code monkey days in the early part of my career. And decided I wanted to be closer to the front line. I think I have a natural draw towards seeing the impact of what I do. So I went to business school and graduated around the dot-com bubble time. And I kind of joke that I've sort of been doing the same job since then because technology evolves exponentially, and at best, businesses can adopt and keep a linear pace. And the sweet spot where I built my career is sort of between those two. So yeah, I joined, I did a little bit of consulting after business school, and then I was at Texas Instruments for almost a decade. Really saw their digital journey for a very long time, was a deep part of that. Then I went into distribution. I wanted to get some e-com. So worked for, I actually spent some time with a semiconductor distribution player, which took me back to Asia, was based in Singapore. And I was an electricals distribution player, back to manufacturing with PPG, and then back into distribution. So I really spent my career in B2B, both on the manufacturing side and in distribution.
You've flicked between manufacturing and distribution and seen a lot of change in kind of the approach and technologies that these businesses have been using. What do you think some of the biggest changes that you sort of experienced over that time have been in the way that manufacturers and distributors approach customer interaction, approach utilizing e-commerce to kind of drive change, drive growth, operational efficiencies?
Yeah, I mean, it's the things you would expect, right? I mean, one of the drivers for me leaving TI was I wasn't able to convince TI that we should sell direct to our customers. This is in 2008, 2009 timeframe, and if you go and look at since then, it's changed a lot, right? And so I wanted that e-commerce, I wanted that conversion, which is why I went to distribution in the first place. So I think, of course, it's in the emerging tech space, it's all the things that you would expect. It's the disruption that e-commerce has had. It's a disruption that the social aspect of the web has had, and then all the versions of AI, right? So when I went back to manufacturing at PPG, as much as the customer sort of side of things was a focus, a big part of the focus was also on how are we going to use AI and machine learning in particular at that time, more on our operations side. So in our plants and in our supply chain, et cetera.
Gotcha. Were you overseeing both sides of that, the customer side?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of, when we laid out the digital sort of strategy there, we put it on two vectors, so the customer experience side as well as a use case based approach with AI across the value chain.
Gotcha. Up and down that value chain.
Yes.
And I think one of the kind of topic areas I'd love to start is around kind of strategy and transformation. With kind of the leadership roles that you've had, I think our audience will be really interested to hear how you approach kind of strategy and thinking about digital transformation. And we worked on a project together recently, and I kind of shared with you. You shared an email right at the beginning of that project that I just loved. It kind of articulated exactly what was important about moving online, what it would do for the customers. I don't know if you could share a little bit about your approach to digital transformation, how you galvanize teams, how you think about strategy.
By nature, I'm a builder, or I'm attracted to pain, one of the two.
Sucker for punishment.
Yeah. So of course you got to understand the business, you got to understand the industry, because I've gone from TI where we sold semiconductor chips to my latest role where we sold toilet paper. So
Is that a bit different?
$1 billion business. There's a lot of similarities.
Yeah.
So of course, you got to understand the business. I have to understand the industry. Most importantly, I have to understand our customers, and because you don't want to fall into that trap of just assuming that the playbook that you had in the past is exactly the same. Now, there's a lot of it that is the same, but there's a lot that does need to differ. So there is that learning part that is critical. And then I try to zero in on, I'm a big believer of understanding the why. And it starts with me. So the strategy needs to be tied to what's the end impact that we want to try and create, which hopefully is in line with what we're trying to do as a business, right? So at the end of the day, I'm a big believer that there is no digital strategy, there is no AI strategy. Those are all enablers of our overall business strategy. And so understanding what we're trying to do as a business, what levers we are already playing on, and how we can use, at the end of the day, digital is just emerging tech, right? How can I use technology to better empower our existing levers, or maybe pop open some new ones that we may not have thought about? That's the general approach, but it really comes from there. And then once we identify those, the why for me has to turn into dollars.
And that could be, I assume, dollars in terms of revenue or dollars in terms of operational costs.
Those are the only two at the end of the day. And everything has to come down to that, because I've never worked for a nonprofit organization.
Is that next?
I don't know. But even there's always some impact that you're trying to optimize, right? So trying to come back to, hey, here's the end goals that we want to drive towards, and then here's the what and the how that we will sort of align into. And that email that you referred, thanks for sharing it with me, by the way. It's like, what email is he talking about? No, I knew exactly what you were talking about, because the purpose of that, if you look at it, is very clear. And I literally copied those 2 paragraphs and I reused them several times, often on an ongoing basis, because it clearly lays out the what we're doing, the how we're going to do it, and the second paragraph is the why we're doing it.
I think that's really important, right? That North Star is delivering for the business. Everything else is about adding to that goal or delivering on that goal. And that email you sort of referenced, I won't, but like sort of paraphrasing-ish, you sort of effectively said, our goal here is to build the best experience we can for our customers. And if we put customer at the core of everything and build that experience, naturally their enjoyment of shopping with us is going to improve, our NPS will improve, and our share of wallet will increase.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
But anchoring it to the customer.
Yeah. So two thoughts there. We talked about my approach. One of the things I do focus on is the human being. I'm a big believer that this is a human journey and not a technology journey. Even with AI, it is our journey, at least thus far. And you don't want to lose sight of that, right? So whether it's, and I know we'll talk about some of this, right? Whether it's on the e-com or omni-channel side, there's a lot of human beings that are involved, specifically the salespeople, or in AI. Every aspect of AI, any use case in AI has human beings that have to interact with it and or are impacted by it. And you've got to start there and understand who these humans are, what they're doing today, how they're doing it today, what will shift, why it should shift, how they may feel about it. It's a very different thing if I'm communicating to you with a place of understanding versus a place of, hey, I think you should do this because I built this.
And I think that's really important. We often think about kind of B2C and B2B very differently. B2C, it's experiential purchasing, etc. But at the end of the day, on the B2B side, unless I'm selling to an AI bot, which might be in the future, or even happening now, I'm selling to a person, and that person has feelings and emotions, and how you invoke those emotions as they go through your process is actually really important. To your point, you might be about to completely change the way that they interact with you. They may or may not like that. How do you kind of think about it? I want to ask some questions about how you manage teams internally, but maybe before we get to that, how do you bring customer into the center of the projects that you've managed and you've led?
By talking to them. So those 3 first CDO experiences, literally the very first thing that I pushed on was a study to understand journey mapping, because none of them had that understanding. So it was anecdotal, right? It's like, okay, so what's the journey that our customers go through? Depending on who I spoke to, I would get a different perspective. Now, it's not like the truth is there, but so the first thing is really spending, and that the way those studies are constructed, there's a qualitative portion of that, and there's a quantitative portion of that.
Interviews and then gathering data.
Yeah, and I try to sit in on at least 60-70% of those 1-hour interviews, because that is the best way to learn about the business, and most importantly, to learn about the business and the industry from the customer's lens. So yeah, those 20, I don't make all of them, but if you do 20-hour sessions, I'm there for at least 15 or 16 of them. And so that's the starting point. And then I think as we get into execution, you've got to find the right process and measures to keep that perspective centric. So you talked about NPS. I know there's a lot of debate about the pros and cons around NPS. Honestly, I think the thought is more important than the number. And so, at least in my experience, I've used, you start on the quantitative side, right? You have your analytics, and for me, NPS has been sort of North Star KPI because it drives everything else. And then you have all the qualitative side, right? Whether you build out a customer panel or you do deep dives with specific customers, depending on what aspect of the journey you're digging into. But yeah, it's really about being in the field. It is, a lot of customer visits with salespeople, in particular, when you get to a certain part of your journey. You gotta, I think there's that hashtag get out of the building. You have to be
put yourselves in their shoes.
You gotta, even if it's an internal, like an AI use case, being in the plant and seeing what's happening there is a big way to learn.
I think that point around NPS is actually really important, which is that may or may not be the right metric, but you're changing behavior and the way people think. I've anchored you to NPS. Now you're thinking about customer.
Yes.
Right. And that might be different for different, manufacturers, different distributions, what that analytic is, but you've anchored in customer experience and ensuring that their satisfaction is improving. And I think that's a really kind of important piece, regardless of what that ends up being, is your kind of right analytic.
Whatever that measure is, right? Yeah. I mean, find the one, but find not just a measure. I mean, of course, a measure is good, but then build out your process that keeps that. It's got to be a feedback loop on an ongoing basis, right? So you never drift too far away from whoever that human is that you're solving for, and you gotta completely realign.
So you've managed very large global teams, big transformations. What about internally? Obviously, we want to anchor to some form of kind of North Star, but actually bringing teams along for that ride is difficult. If I say to the sales team, NPS, yes, it's going to drive share of wallet, that's good for you, commissions, they might go, that sounds like that's a couple of years away, and I care about earning my commission, this year. So how do you bring teams together? How do you galvanize everyone around the project, show them the benefit for them?
Yeah, so the internal piece, I think it's got maybe 3 different flavors from my perspective. The first is usually the early part when you're sort of building the business case. You're building, because especially in those situations where I had the pleasure of being the first digital leader, a lot of times the company may feel like their job is done because they hired me, and he's gonna kind of figure out what needs to happen, which is a trap, of course, and we don't fall into that, but it's a starting point, right? So the first sort of internal focus around people is at the executive level, right? It's with the leaders, the equivalent of whoever the executive team is, building the business case, doing all the things we just talked about, right? Making sure that we've identified the right whys, we've sized them in the right way, that sizing is meaningful to the business. So it's worth going to do because it's going to require an investment. And that process requires us to go through some stuff. So the first group of people are the ones that I have to align with on the why we're doing, the what and how are we going to do it, and the how much it's going to cost. So they have to fund it. So that's the first group. Then the second group, so then we go into execution, and I've found in my experience, there's sort of two very distinct kind of phases, and then you kind of get into an agile. They're both happening at the same time, but there's a phase where you definitely got to build, and then you get into you deploy it, and then you're in an sort of a sprint, whatever your sprint iterative deployment is, and at that point there's the humans that have to help sort of adopt, right? And I think with both of those, you have to kind of manage them, or at least I try to bring distinct views on that. One that is very common though is, again, that tying back to the, hey, don't forget, this is why we're doing it. And at the end of the day, these are the impact and the value creation opportunities that we're going after, right? So, and here's the who that we're doing it for. So all of those things have to come into play. But then, of course, there's the managing the execution piece and putting in the right processes and the operating model there. And then in the omni-channel e-com side, definitely working with the field I always say that when you're building it, you want to be outside in, right? Starting with the customer journey and in. But when you're trying to drive adoption and activating the platforms that you've built, you got to go inside out. Because most of the organizations I've been in B2B, whether it's on the manufacturing side or the distribution side, the customer relationship has been with the field. So
support teams, sales teams,
everything. It's the human beings that they're talking to, they are who the company is to them, to our customers. And so if I'm going to get a customer to change their behavior, they have to hear it from Mike or Susan or whoever they talk to on a daily basis.
And I'm curious, just kind of a really quick follow-up there. You spoke about obviously anchoring to that North Star. Did you ever have to think about kind of incentivizing that team, that sales team in the right way to make that happen? Was that something that you've used as a tactic? How do you think about kind of training that team? I just think folks will be interested to hear, how at these large organizations you've approached that and whether you've had to add grease to the wheels, if you will.
Yeah. So I'm not a fan of like dollar or those kind of incentives because I feel like it's not a sustainable change because and I think there's literature even with parenting that's like, hey, you can bribe your kid into a behavior, but if you really want them to shift their behavior, you've got to make a more meaningful connection. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of something like that. I do think the right approach is, to me, of course, it's a little bit, it's the optimizing sort of the top down and the bottoms up. So I do see value in working with the sales leaders and setting specific goals
around adoption,
around digital, around whatever it is, around whatever it is the technology is that we are trying to drive adoption of. We have to have, it has to be a part of the conversation between a sales leader and the sales team. Without Devashish there or anybody from digital there, it has to be something they're trying to do.
The sales leader is the owner.
When they are trying to do it, then there is a meaningful chance that it's going to get done. If only I am trying to do it, forget about it. It's not going to happen. So that's sort of you got to get that in place. And then how do you come at it with the field? And I don't know. There's a. Do you know what bright spots are?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I think it was the Heath brothers. They wrote this out a long time ago, and so in connecting with the field, I'm a big fan of using bright spots, right? I mean, just in my recent experience, we on the former, we said, okay, we are going to go from let's pick arbitrary numbers, 25% web penetration to 35% web penetration in the next 12 months. Okay, that's the top down. We're setting goals, and we can bring them down from across the leaders down to the rep level, right? Done. So now you got to put the plan in place at the field level. How do I support? I can do communication, training, support. There's a lot of things that I can do. But I asked my my analytics team, just like, hey, can you look at the last 12 months and find any reps that have naturally high penetration already on the web? So we found 15 reps, more than 2 million in sales, so very meaningful portfolio with 95% web penetration. I was like, great. I need 30 minutes with each one of these guys and gals.
Yeah.
Let's talk to them. And I just reached out and I said, hey, here's the situation. You guys are doing something. Whether you might know it, you might not know it. Do you mind if we just sit down for 30 minutes and you can just talk about what your approach is? And those conversations are mind-blowing. I mean, it's like it's like often you find it's simple things that they're doing, but they're not thinking about it.
Yeah.
They're just doing it.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, as an example, in this space, the common theme was they just presented the online connect as the natural step in building a relationship with the firm. It's like, okay, this is done, you're here, good. Now just sign up here and then we'll do this. And so that's it. And there was no. So yeah, I'm a big fan of at the field level using those bright spots to understand, and then often in engaging them in those conversations, you build a relationship, and then you're like, hey, do you mind? I'm going to speak to these 50 reps, because again, if the message comes from their peer, then I can just get out of the way.
Yeah, I love that. Find the success points and then replicate that.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that at the field level.
Yeah,
because they're always there. Every time I've looked, they're always there.
Yeah. There'll be some that are already doing it, and they're high performing.
They're always often they're hidden.
Yeah,
because we just look at macro data as like, oh, our web penetration is so low, and there's a lot that you can find that aren't doing it, which is why it's low. But that doesn't mean that those bright spots aren't there. So yeah, that's just a tactic that I like using. It's also a great way to just, again, talk to those humans, and you learn a lot of things. It's like about their customers and things like that.
Getting sales along, finding those bright spots, replicating it. I really like that. You kind of spoke about omni-channel there. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about technologies. You've probably seen a lot of technologies, custom, open source, monoliths, extreme open platforms. I'm curious what your approach is to technology today, how you've seen that change. Lots of discussion about composable and Mark, and I'd love to sort of see that evolution that you kind of probably been through, where you think kind of the market is now, and what your general approach is to thinking about tech.
Yeah, in terms of technology, you obviously, the way I think about it, Lance, is I have to optimize. At the end of the day, I got to deliver the why, right? And in my execution, I have to optimize between it's the same things, right? The speed, the cost, and the what I'm going to do, right? And where I focus my technology attention as a leader are in the areas where I feel are going to be critical in driving that differentiation that we need, that are critical on the why.
So it's less about the technology itself, more about servicing.
Well, it is about the technology, but I want to spend time trying to understand which specific portions are going to be really critical, where we're going to use the technology to truly differentiate. Because if if I have the exact same stack and the exact same experience as every one of my competitors, then it's there's no differentiation, right? I mean, I've just commoditized my business.
Yeah, I think that's
And then every time the rep goes to the other business, the business will go with them, which is what happens often in distribution.
that is such a good point. If your technology stack looks the same as your competitors, your experience looks the same as your competitors, how are you differentiating?
Yeah.
Why are they staying with you? How are you keeping the customer? That is a really great.
But there's got to be more than it.
Of
more
course.
than the
Yeah, which is more than just the technology. There's a lot more to that. But if you're taking kind of a box that everyone else is using, that kind of same box of tech, and you can't, manipulate that in the way you want to build the experience you want, well, you're going to look and feel like your competitors.
Yeah.
That's your.
So the technology has to. So for me, where it has to really enable the differentiation is very critical that we pick the right tech and the right partners. Whether it's on the tech side or on the implementation, how we bring it to life is really critical.
And for that, is that sort of why you like that kind of composable approach? It's allowing you to pick and choose the best.
Yeah, I mean, like generally speaking, I've worked in more complex, larger global organizations where they're often the processes are not simple.
You said not simple. You didn't use the word complex.
Yeah, well, they're not simple. They're not standardized.
Yeah.
And so there's one of the execution pillars for me, when I look at omnichannel, I think about sort of the first phase on the build, when you're building out of obviously the customer experience, but you're also building out the data and a big focus on business processes, because if you put a very nice experience on a really bad process, you deliver a very bad experience, and it will be reflected in your KPI, customer KPI of choice.
You're in big organizations, there's lots of complexity. You need to handle that complex process. If that requires a specific technology that can meet that need, you need to be able to plug that in, right? You got to be able to plug that in. And that's super important to deliver that experience. I think you said something that's interesting there, which is around process. I think often when I'm talking to manufacturers and distributors, they say, oh, we've got to follow this specific process because that's what we've done for the last 20 years and we're going to continue doing that. Have you found that actually as you've gone, as you've taken on these roles, as you've been driving digital change, that you've been able to change those business processes that didn't really potentially make sense or weren't operationally efficient in the first place with the digital transformation? Because I often hear that as a blocker to the transformation. Well, we can't build that process online, so why should we bother? And to me, that doesn't make any sense. Think about how you change the process. I'm curious what your approach there is.
You have to change the processes. I don't think not changing them is an option, in my perspective. When I sent out that email, in our execution, there is we called it, and there's essentially a work stream that is focused on process. And we prioritize which processes we're going to focus on based on our product roadmap. So we know these are the capabilities that we want to bring online. And based on that, we understand the processes that sit behind it. And we go, okay, these processes are okay, or they're not okay. And if they're not okay, then where do they need to be so we can deliver the end experience that we have in mind? And you cannot separate the product capability from the process that sits behind it. So you 100%, you got to go and do it.
Yeah. I think that's a really important takeaway. You should be willing to think about how does the tech marry with that process, and if that process is inefficient, you can think about changing it. Be willing to do that as part of the
and it's not easy. I mean, I think that's why it's called transformation, because you're right. A lot of times these processes in distributors and manufacturers were designed often decades ago, far from being optimized for customers, but optimized for something completely different, and 99% of the time something very internal. And now we're coming in saying, we're doing this for the customer, we're going to build out this experience, and we have to optimize this process to serve the customer, not whoever we served before. So so not only is it critical, but it's not easy. but it has to be done. Otherwise, I almost say, don't even worry about
What's the point?
you're not gonna get to the results that you're seeking if you don't address it.
Yeah, I think that's so key. One of the areas that comes up also a lot in sort of conversations with folks that are maybe even newer to moving online is how to think about data and how important that is. And that can be product data to customer data to kind of order data and across the whole piece. I'm curious how you thought about that in your kind of digital transformations. Do you have to get all of that right? Can it be done in parallel? And where you've had, I'm sure you've come up to against lots of use cases here where the product data isn't right, isn't accurate, where the customer data isn't right, you're not reflecting things correctly, order information isn't being captured. How do you solve that? How do you think about the data as a driver?
It's just like process. You've got to address the data at the same time as when you're building out your experience. But you can take an iterative approach to it. But you have the way I like to see it is, again, data is a work stream. We've identified which data we are focused on, the current state, the desired state, and a plan to get there. So it's got to be done. On the e-com omnichannel side, of course, the first priority is product data, right? And as you can imagine, with distributors in particular, since they're not often the generators of that content, so that's it's often not the best position. Starting lineup is not good. So there's in the early phase, there's a big focus on, hey, I got to get to at least this level,
product
right? Or product data quality, I got to be at least, but we have to define it,
yeah.
Right? I got to define, it's like, hey, this is what it is today. These are the measures. This is what we need it to be for this launch. And by this time, it needs to be here. And then other data sources, customer data in particular, especially when you're going to start activating with marketing levers and things like that, you got to start putting that in place as well.
Once you've got the data, you've got some of that technology in place, now you start to hopefully be able to get iterative in that process, starting to experiment, testing and learning and getting that feedback loop going. I'm curious, kind of from your experience, what are some of the really interesting kind of experiments with data that you've kind of seen that have actually driven measurable, impactful revenue growth or operational efficiencies for sort of businesses? Once you get to that stage, you kind of lined all the ducks up. Now we're ready to, I kind of also call it crawl, walk, run. Now we're ready to run.
Yeah.
We're testing, we're being iterative. Are there some kind of really interesting kind of lessons that you've taken in terms of ways that you can start to really think about optimizing and testing and learning?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, there's a lot of things that we could touch there. But I'm going to maybe go to something that ties back to the adoption side as an example. So at one of the firms that I was with, remember we talked about those 3 different groups of folks. So you had my executive team, and the team that's executing, and sort of the customer service, the sales, et cetera. And so, in the spirit of, eating my own dog food kind of thing, it's like, okay, I'm going to use data to drive informed decisions. So I'm like, okay, we did studies, and we showed and we shared, thinking that, hey, look, when we come to the field or when we're talking to the executive team, we can show why the omni-channel customer is more valuable, right? Tied to the whys that we've defined. Let's start to show that. And one of the, so we had to.
How did you define omni-channel?
Wait, that's a good question. We defined it as a person who has interacted in both the digital and the other channels within a certain time frame. So they're interacting with both channels. That's how we defined it in terms of transaction. You can get a lot deeper, because you can look at, there's a lot of omni behaviors where the part of the journey is very digital, and then other aspects of the journey are still not digital, but you got to just anchor somewhere. But we did this study, and then one of the leaders of I think at that time he ran Asia. He said, Devashish, this is good, but essentially what you're showing is correlation. I said, you're right, because it was.
Yeah.
Right, because we the way we had structured it, so it's kind of like an experiment in experimentation, because we're like, okay, so now we got to go back, and this was a learning on the analytics side. Like, we got to go back, and how do we structure this so we can truly show causation?
Yeah.
Because the entire premise that we are asking this business to do is we are saying, convert your non-digital customers into digital customers, define them as you want, some level of digital adoption, and it's good for them and it's good for us. And we are asking them to drive this behavior. We should own telling them why, and then showing them why. Like, hey, look, these are the numbers. It actually works. So that was a test on the measurement itself, and then we had to go back, and we did, and we structured a study, and we showed causation, and the numbers proved what we were hoping they would prove, which was good.
It wasn't just these omni-channels, always been omni-channel, and yes.
No. So, and then it was like, well, maybe it's just in this country. It's like, okay, let's do it in this country. So we did it in 8 different countries. And the headline was still the same. The numbers and the ranges and the specifics were different. But that really helped galvanize in that firm. People just stopped questioning it. And that goes back to when the sales team says, this is what we're going to do, then adoption just takes off.
Yeah. Anchored in that really, this is the why. We're showing how this works.
Yeah.
We've proven it.
Yeah. We're not just saying this is the why. Here's the proof that the why exists. And then you get that real oomph.
Yeah.
Because now the business starts to adopt it, own it.
Yeah.
Right. It's
not.
Not.
That's it. They own it.
They own it. They're like,
it.
no, it's in the interest of the business leader to drive that, because it's going to impact positively their P&L, right? And if you can make a connection to a behavior that you are trying to drive, and a P&L owner's P&L, you're going to get very enthusiastic compliance.
I bet. You not only have you shown causation, you've shown correlation, causation, and that causation. Then the second order is, well, that's my paycheck as a salesperson. So
exactly. They can do that math on their own.
Exactly, You didn't have to. You can lead the horse to water. Now you guys figured it out.
We did. We did joke about, it's like, if we can build a little calculator that they can just plug stuff in, and you can simulate for groups of customers
commission impact.
If you had this behavior change, what that would mean in terms of my commission.
I love that. That's good. I wonder did you actually build it?
No.
Oh,
it was more a happy hour conversation.
I'd love to see that. That'd be great. We're kind of coming towards the end of this conversation, which has been incredible. But I want to sort of end on a topic that I think is hot on everyone's lips, which is AI, of course. And you mentioned it earlier. And the funny thing I think about this is manufacturers, distributors who've been using AI for a long time, whether that's kind of in operations, supply chain, demand forecasting, machine learning, right? Or on the front end, with customers, maybe there's been a chat bot that actually really is some form of AI. That's what it's been. I'm curious how you see AI really transforming manufacturing, distribution kind of over the coming years. What's getting you excited about what you're seeing in the market right now?
So, like when I was, we talked about, when I was at PPG, we established the firm's first AI Center of Excellence, and they're still doing wonderful work. But a lot of the use cases that we identified and the approaches that we were taking were more machine learning than even AI at that point. Then Gen AI came out, and I think personally, we played with some content generation use cases, with product descriptions, images, things like that, which is, or in the marketing side, which to be fair, I was kind of like, okay, that's great, but so what? But I think what I'm seeing now with where Gen AI is truly powering with the agentic, so the AI agents and which I think of as kind of a new way of just building software or a new operating system. I think that can truly be. This sort of reminds me of, when I came out of business school and the dot-com bubble and the beginning of the internet and
that kind
the
of
things that were
function
possible.
Change.
Yeah, and I think it feels to me like that this can be that, right? You had that step change with machine learning and of course deep learning and things like that, but the scope of where you can take that methodology is across the entire value chain, right? And the value creation that can happen for a lot of firms is going to be off the top. Now, it's still going to be a journey. It's not. I don't think it's. I always think we overestimate the impact of technology in the short term, and that's that space that I live in, and I know what it takes to get to some of that. The promise, it takes years, and let's be honest, in the B2B space, we haven't been leaders, which is a shame. I want that to change. That's why I'm still here.
Well, I'm really curious. I kind of see this as a potentially when B2B starts to overtake B2C, because the efficiency gains here, I think more likely to be attributed on the B2B side than on the B2C. Obviously, on B2C, yes, you can change the experience, but here this is a lot more operational in nature, and that's
100%. 100%. I agree. I mean, I think the scope of what you can go after is huge, but firms need to take a informed sort of approach to it, right? I don't think the solution is just go out and start building agents. I think the solution is what we talked about before. It's like, no, it's not an agentic AI strategy. We still have a business strategy. We know we should identify as a firm, each firm should identify what are the top sort of 3 to 5 spaces where the processes are so critical and they're truly differentiators in our business ecosystem, and give us the ability to do the right thing with this technology, which is an enabler, right? So I feel that as I've gotten deeper and deeper into just my own learning and the use cases that I'm seeing and learning from, this does feel pretty exciting.
Devashish, this was such a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be here.